Well, hi, and welcome to our Thursday evening Zoom, our Michigan Solar Story. And I'm John Sarver on the with the Great Lakes Renewable Energy Association, a board member. And I would like to thank our sponsors, the State Department of Environment, Great Lakes and Energy, EGLE, and Homeland Solar, Harvest Solar, and GLREA Energy. And tonight, and of course, I have to mention, if you're not a member, boy, you got to join up. You can join up at our website, glrea.org. You go there, press a few buttons, join up online. You'll be part of the family. So if you haven't done that, go ahead. And but tonight we have John Richter, who's the chair of the GLREA Policy Committee. So he's heavily involved in reading thousands of pages of utility applications, proposals, and interveners testimony. And he's the chair of our policy committee. So he's very informed about utility issues. And so he's going to tell us today about virtual power plants, which probably everybody has heard something about, but may not know some of the specifics. So John, go ahead. Oh, by the way, everybody, please mute yourself.
So, the big mystery that I did not put in the descriptions, right? What is a virtual power plant? Well, the DOE Loan Programs Office says it's a connected aggregation, and I emphasize that word, of distributed energy resource technologies, which offer deeper integration of renewables and demand flexibility, which in turn offers more Americans cleaner and more affordable power. So key phrases here: distributed energy resource. So that could be solar, that could be batteries, that could be an electric vehicle. And that there's some aggregation of these. So it's not just individual homes or businesses with these resources, but they are somehow then interlinked and work together. Now, the aggregator could be the electric utility, and historically they have been, but it is increasingly common now that a third-party company that specializes in virtual power plants acts as the aggregator, contacts the distributed energy resource owners, and enrolls them in a program. What then happens is when the utility sends some kind of signal, there's different ways they can do that the grid is under stress. The virtual power plant responds by reducing demand or feeding back power back into the grid, or a combination of both, right? So this relieves the grid stress and hopefully avoids rolling blackouts as have occurred in some areas of the country. This is the Department of Energy's. Oh, by the way, I wanted to say, if you have questions, we are going to have time tonight. I don't have a whole lot of slides. Feel free to stop me and interrupt me while I'm right there and I can show it to you. This is the Department of Energy's conception. There's generation and transmission and distribution. So those blue squares, that's the utility companies. And then there's this virtual power plant, perhaps an aggregator. And you see, we've got energy moving around electric services here from the utility to the consumers. We have this communication line, this black line, right, where the utility tells the VPP, hey, we've got a problem. And then the VPP, or the DER orchestration, they call it here, right, signals all these different consumers. And there may be bidirectional electric vehicle chargers, there may be on-site generation, EV chargers, smart. Now here we're getting kind of demand response things, smart water heaters, smart thermostats, energy storage that can be called on, industrial operations that might be changed to reduce their consumption. So there's all kinds of different ways that customers and energy resources can then respond to the call, right, and reduce their load or perhaps inject electricity into the grid, which is kind of the newer concept here. So there's two key problems that this can solve. One is the question of how do we add capacity to the electric grid quickly? The Midwest Independent System Operator Region, so this is called MISO, and I'll show you a map, that includes Michigan, has been declared at high risk of rolling blackouts due to a lack of generating capacity starting in 2025. That's now. So more likely to happen in the summer. Building new power plants takes years. So the classical answer, well, if we don't have enough capacity, we'll just build more power plants, is just not fast enough. The other related problem is how do we balance the intermittent nature of solar and wind with demand for electric energy, right? This is called load balancing. Solar doesn't produce at night. Wind produces when the wind's blowing. So what happens if there's not enough generation when we need it? This is from the National Energy Reliability Council. This is a map of the different independent system operators and their subregions. And they evaluated them, and this is what they do, right? This is what their reason to exist is to evaluate power supply adequacy. And they color coded them by their risk of rolling blackouts. And you'll notice there's only one region that's red, and that's ours. And that high risk means that shortfalls may occur at normal peak conditions, not some sort of weather extreme like we saw, in Texas with winter storm Uri back in 2021, but just normal high demand conditions, things like a hot summer day.
John, you've got a question from Dave Curtis.
Yeah, go ahead, Dave.
Thank you for letting me butt in. I'm guessing that the utilities, consumers, and DTE in Michigan absolutely hate this idea.
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
So let me explain that though, right? Because they are not going to say that. Um, the way utilities make profit is by investing money in equipment that they get the MPSC to approve. Their profits are based on the total capital that they've invested minus historical depreciation. So making electricity, I mean, that's just sort of the excuse for buying equipment, right? It's all about buying equipment. And the higher peak demand is, the more equipment they need, the more generation they need, the more distribution system they need, bigger transformers, right? So high peak demand actually generates profits for the utilities because of the way they're regulated.
Yes,
Um,
and they want to raise their rates accordingly for their
oh, that's all baked
shareholders.
in. That's a formula,
Okay,
right?
thank you.
Once they've invested the capital, they're guaranteed a profit, and that gets layered into the rates as part of
Okay,
the rate making process.
yep, thank you. That's my whole point. Thank you.
Yep. And so they don't like anything that reduces peak demand. That they don't like solar on your roof because it reduces peak demand and they don't own it, so they don't get to make a profit from it. Virtual power plants fall in the same category. Virtual
So,
power plants are the quick capacity solution. If you look at electric demand across the last 20 years, it's been roughly flat on a US basis, actually declining slightly in Michigan. But now it's increasing. We're bringing some more manufacturing back to the United States. We're seeing this huge rise in data centers and artificial intelligence computing, and suddenly we need more electric power. Meanwhile, we've shut down more than half of all the coal plants in the country, and we replace this with wind and solar, which are intermittent. Building new power plants takes a long time. There's a lot of buzz in the press and certainly from a certain half of the government about we need nuclear power. Well, the most recent nuclear power plant that became operational, which was just a year or two ago, took 11 years from approval to operation. Here in Michigan, DTE's Blue Water gas plant, and gas plants are allegedly quicker to get in installation. That still took almost 4 years. Yes, Jim Bates. You're muted, Jim. Still
you're
muted.
muted.
Oh, there you go. could you explain, if not now, later, how this worked in California when they had rolling blackouts? And they said that because of this program, there's the only reason kept the lights on in California.
I don't have California specific data, but I do have an example of that in another jurisdiction I'll be showing us. Yes.
All right, great. Thanks.
There's also a question from Harvey Bell too.
Okay, Harvey.
So I want to make sure that people understand that when you've got a peak power performance, when I'm generating power and I get compensated from DTE, they're making lots of money because they're only paying me, you know, if it's mid-range, 9 cents a kilowatt hour. And if they're charging, you know, time of use next door, it's like 22 cents. So they've invested no capital, you know, and they're making money. And so I want to sort of diffuse the thought that, you know, distributed generation, they don't make any money. They make a ton of money, in my humble opinion.
Yeah, I'd have to walk through exactly how rates get set in the rate making process, and that's a lot deeper than I'm prepared to go here tonight. So, according to the US Department of Energy, by 2030, that's only 5 years away. I have trouble adjusting to that, right? The US needs 200 gigawatts of new capacity. So if you look at, say, ferronuclear power, that's like 1.3 gigawatts, I think. The Monroe plant, coal plant is absolutely huge. That's about 3 gigawatts. They say that virtual power plants could deliver 180 to 160 gigawatts during that, which is most of that need, right? Reducing load or creating outflow not only provides relief to generation, but it relieves the transmission and distribution grids as well. So even if we could build more power plants, we'd have to upgrade the transmission and distribution systems. And in fact, the transmission system has been the slowest one to change. And this solves all three problems at the same time. Currently, here in Michigan, the Michigan Public Service Commission is allowing virtual power plants only for customers with a load greater than a megawatt. That is, only those large customers, which are going to be mostly industrial or maybe, I don't know, big box stores wouldn't get over that. Only they can participate in a virtual power plant program. To give you an example of how this is a quick solution, Ontario, our neighbor to the east, set up a VPP, and they got 60 megawatts of peak production in 6 months. That's pretty quick. California got 142 megawatts in a year. Texas got 80 megawatts in their pilot program before they even did a full launch. This is the DOE's graphic. So this is our current state over here. We've got a peak demand of about 800 gigawatts. This is the US, right? 30 gigawatts of that is being supplied by virtual power plants today. By 2030, right, we're going to have 100 gigawatts of plants retiring. It's mostly coal plants. And we're going to have another 100 gigawatts of demand. So we have a gap of 200 gigawatts that we need to add to get to 900, right? We're only going from 800 to 900, but we've got 100 that are retiring. And they're saying, hey, we can get 80 to 160 of that from virtual power plants. It's significant, right? It's a big deal. Now, virtual power plants are really just an extension of an old idea, which is demand response programs. I remember this from being in high school in the 1970s, right? We had a thing on our water heater that the utility could send a signal and it would turn the electric water heater off for a few hours, right? And we got a break on our electric rates for that. And that program still exists. I mean, literally the same program. So they all kind of operate that way. Typically, they're turning off some customer device, either your water heater or your air conditioner, usually. There are some limits on how long they can turn it off so that you don't, you know, you're able to get about your business eventually, and how often they can do it. And in return, they give you a break on your rates or a bill credit. I think our utilities, it's all lower rates. But this is problematic. So as an example, in the last DT electric rate case, I dragged this information out of them through Discovery, which is a marvelous tool. They have these on-site devices to turn off people's central air conditioners, right? Some of the older ones, they send a radio signal to. The others, they signal in a different way, and it's using the cell network. And they've discovered that about 40% of all these devices don't actually work. So when they say, oh, we have a stress point and they send out the signal, 40% of them stay on and running anyway. Many of these, it turns out, were disconnected from the power. So it's not just that it was a crummy piece of equipment and it died, it's been sabotaged. If you're the homeowner and you pull the one wire off of this little thing, lo and behold, they can't turn off your air conditioner anymore, but you still get the break on your rates. So I pointed this out in the case, and no one said anything about it. It didn't matter. DTE's response was they're going to go out and replace these with a better device across the next few years. They're not really sure. So you may read that there are more than 500 virtual power plants operating in the US, but most of these are just old demand response programs that kind of got a shiny new marketing name because it's cool to be a virtual power plant, right? And I'm trying to make the distinction, right? The virtual power plants extend this idea, right? We've got something that isn't just inconveniencing the customer to reduce their demand. This is a projection from the Brattle Group. The Brattle Group is a utility consulting company. Their testimony has appeared in utility cases before the Public Service Commission. I know DTE used them in their integrated resource plan. And this is their projection. The blue bars are today, and the orange bars are 2030, right? So rooftop solar is here, and it's going to grow. Energy storage at residences is rather small now, but it's going to grow. Smart thermostats, still more potential. Electric water heating, they're pretty well tapped out. And then there's light duty electric vehicles, right? Electric vehicles that have the potential to act as an energy resource. Yes, Jim?
Are you looking, am I not seeing a screen? Because you're referencing a screen that I don't see. I just see people's faces.
Oh, well, I am sharing my screen and I don't know why you're
I
not
can see it.
No, I can
Jim, I
see
think
your
something's
screen.
wrong with your screen because the rest of us, in fact, see it.
Okay,
Maybe you should
Figured.
exit the webinar and come back in again.
yeah, maybe.
Like swipe left, if you're on the phone, swipe left or right.
Sorry to interrupt. I'll go back out and come back in.
Good luck
Thanks.
with that.
Yeah.
Technology can be very frustrating. In at least 8 utilities in the US, including Consumers Energy here in Michigan, they offer a program called Critical Peak Rewards. And I wrote a bunch of testimony about how this works and where it's being done. The utility either emails or texts or calls, automated calls, customers, depending on what communication method they've asked for, and says, hey, the grid needs a load reduction tomorrow from 4 to 8 p.m., something like that. Customers who have enrolled in this get these communications, and they then voluntarily reduce their load by any means they choose. Now, that's what I really love about this, right? Is it's not, here is the way we're going to reduce the load. It's left up to the customer. You figure out how to reduce your load. The utility, after this period is done, computes how much energy each participant would have normally used during the period, right? They have your historical usage. They know how the weather changed. They can project that rather accurately. And they then pay a substantial credit for how much you reduced it below what you would normally use in that period. Consumers Energy is paying $1 a kilowatt hour for reduced use, which is a heck of a lot better than the solar outflow rate. The other beauty of this is there's no penalty for doing nothing, right? If you don't respond to their message, then you just get charged regular rates. Nothing's different. And so they don't have to number or limit how many critical peaks that they might declare. And you don't have to be afraid to enroll because they might declare one while you're on vacation and you can't do anything about it. So it's kind of cool. Now, customers might just turn off their devices the same way demand response has always worked, right? They might change their thermostat, or they might take their home or business off grid using their battery, using their electric vehicle, using a generator. It's up to you, right? So I wrote testimony about this in a DTE case and suggested they launch such a thing, and they thanked me for the marvelous information and made utterly no commitment to doing anything. So this is an example of a critical peak program that was run in Portland, Oregon. And this is July of 2024. So this was just last summer. They had a hot day and demand was getting hot, and they were worried they didn't have enough capacity. So you can see this is just hours of the day, 3 p.m. to 9 p.m., right, during the same day. And you can see demand is rising as the afternoon wears on and it gets hotter. And they then declared in this blue bar here, right, a critical peak period. You see there's a little bit of delay, and then boom, demand plunged. Demand dropped by 109 megawatts, which was 2.5% of the total grid demand in a very short period there. And, you know, then they ended the end of the period was here, and it jumped back up 52 megawatts, right? So it's very clear that this response was because of this program, and it worked. And it was a greater demand response reportedly than any utility has achieved by any other method. And this was just people doing it, you know, voluntarily. The thing utilities dislike about this is they can't guarantee the result, right? They don't know how many people are going to reduce how much when. There's now, with the popularity of electric vehicles, a fabulous opportunity for vehicle to home, and this is being done. So you can power your home off of your electric vehicle or your hybrid vehicle. So for the last 15 years, anytime there's a power outage, I've been running my house off my Prius. It's astonishingly easy, and I'd love to talk about that, but it's a different topic. If there's a program that rewards load reduction during peak demand, this is an option, right? You just take your home off grid, run it off of your car. Ford is advertising this big time with their F-150 Lightning program, and you take the load off the peak. If there's some way they're going to compensate you for that, right? It can be a good deal. I've included here a YouTube video. So there's a guy that has an electric vehicle. It's a Hyundai Ioniq 5, and that car will put out of its charger only 120 volts. It doesn't do 240 out at 15 amps. So that's, you know, full load of an outlet, 1800 watts. And he walks through all the electrical connections, and he's doing this recording during a power outage and showing you how he's running his house. It's awesome. In my mind, the big difference between demand response and VPPs, well, two really. One is it might not be the utility doing it, right? It's a third party. But the other is that virtual power plants allow for customer export of energy into the grid. You're not just reducing load, you might actually support the grid by shooting energy into them. That can be a discharge of batteries. It could be a discharge of electric vehicle batteries, which is called vehicle to grid. Or it could be, you know, using a generator even. Now, consumers and DTE both have home generator programs, but that's taking your home off grid. It's not actually feeding power back into the grid, which is problematic with generators because you've got to make sure that they're exactly in sync, which is a big deal. Texas is running a virtual power plant program. A third party, which is a German company, which I'm going to mispronounce, called Sonnen, installs batteries in homes, 40 to 60 kilowatt hours, which is a lot more than most solar homes are getting. And they then use them to manage the grid and provide services there. And customers get the benefit of power outage backup, right? The company has programs in Texas, Utah, and Massachusetts. Yes, Harvey.
So are there any companies that you know of in the US that allow vehicle to grid?
Wonderful, wonderful answer. And
No, I mean, wait, are there any programs in the United States that allow vehicles to grid?
not that I'm aware of, but that's not a guarantee.
Yeah, I'm out. Is it California? It's not, you can't do that?
So I believe they have some programs where you take your house off grid, right? But I don't know of any where you inject power. Now, I might be wrong.
Maybe
If
it's
somebody can find an article, send
vehicle to
it to me.
infrastructure. Maybe it's vehicle
Huh?
to infrastructure. So I would say look into Redwood Energy because
Redwood Energy.
he's an expert in that stuff out in Cali and around the country. Sean, and I want to say they've done like designs for housing developments and all that out in Cali where like charging stations, but I'm not sure if they implement. But he would know. He would know like if that's been implemented somewhere. He would definitely know that
Okay.
V2G. Yeah, V2G. Yeah, definitely. He would know it. If somebody to know it, it'd be him.
But John, I thought I read just yesterday or today that the Michigan Public Service Commission came out with an order saying that people who have those F-150s, they can plug them into their house and they don't need to get permission from
Yeah.
DTE to do this.
Correct.
Mm-hmm.
And I read that order, but that's taking your house off grid. It absolutely supports that. And I love that the commission ruled you don't need permission from your utility, right? When are you going to do that? Realistically, the only time you're going to do that's during a power outage, right? Which is what I've been doing for 15 years. The Lightning 150 program makes it all automated, which is really cool. I have to run around the house and plug stuff in, you know. So it's nice, but that's I would call that vehicle to home or vehicle to load, but you're not actually pushing power back onto the grid, which would require
Oh,
utility.
yeah, yeah, yeah. Or what it is that I think the distinction is that I could be wrong. Grid F-150s are grid forming, so that's why you can just have it power up your house because it's grid forming. Like and those what is it? The what car I'm trying to think about is grid following. So I think
Yeah,
something
well,
that's grid
let
following
me
allow it actually yeah. So you want grid following and stuff that can do this VPP because as opposed to grid forming. Not grid forming is not bad. It's just that's the distinction. Yeah.
right. So let me elaborate on that a little bit, right? So if you have solar on your home and you don't have a battery system, your inverter is only operating when it sees the grid. And it then makes sure its output exactly matches in frequency and voltage what the grid has. That's grid following, right? It has to synchronize with the grid exactly. And if you don't have batteries and the grid goes down, you can't even use the solar power that your PVs could be generating because the inverter doesn't have a waveform to copy. Grid forming is the opposite. That's like an off-grid home or a home with a battery system, right? The power grid can be down. There's no grid wave to follow, right? But you're going to generate your own sine wave and provide power to your house. All right, Jim Bates. You're muted, Jim.
Just clarification on this. So Sonnen in Texas and these other two states own the batteries. They place them in customers' homes. Somehow they have control over those batteries. I take it they'd have to let the client know that they're going to use that power. What is there any study that shows the economics? What's the energy return over energy invested in that? So.
Oh, well, so I mean, that's just intrinsic to batteries, right? There's power lost when batteries are charging, and there's also power loss during discharge, right? Due to internal resistance in the battery.
I'm sorry, in terms of dollars, I should have said dollar
dollars. Okay. So that, of course, depends very much on the compensation program, right? How much are they getting for discharging those batteries during a critical peak period? I just said consumers is paying a dollar a kilowatt hour. That's good money.
So
I don't know what the what Texas is paying in that program.
Isn't that, it's not necessarily a local provider, isn't it? Out on the MISO, isn't the rates on a larger?
Oh, that's a wonderful question. I'm going to get to that in a couple more
Okay.
slides.
All right. Thank you.
Yeah, so Tesla is operating a VPP program for customers that have their Powerwall system, right? That's their battery system. It's AC coupled. They're operating that in Connecticut, Hawaii, Massachusetts, North Carolina, Rhode Island, and Texas, and California. They're paying $2 a kilowatt hour when asked to export. Lunar Grid Share and Sunrun are running some programs with other battery installers. California's doing things with ice storage. Now, I've read case studies of this 20 years ago. This is usually for big commercial office buildings. And at night, they'll have their coolers make a bunch of ice. And then during the heat of the day, when electric demand would be high, they use that ice to cool the building instead of running their air conditioner or not running as many compressors on it, and reduce their demand that way. It's kind of a cool thing. So virtual power plants kind of started with thermostats and reducing EV charging rates, right? That's another one. Your charger's hooked up and they're going to slow down your charger. It's still going to charge your car, but not so fast because they need the power now. Those are really just demand response programs. But this is now being expanded to home battery systems, which is kind of cool and a good thing for people that have invested in that.
John, there was a question from Marshall.
Marshall, yes, I'm sorry, I can't see everyone, so do call out when people's hands are up. Thanks.
Okay, yeah, no worries. It was a couple slides back, but I just don't want to get too far ahead. But in regards to the MPSC 1 megawatt kind of limit, I guess, for customers to do a VPP, would aggregated customers qualify if you had like a collection of homes or businesses or churches?
It's one interconnect point to the utility. Is the
Okay.
definition. It's very, very clear in the order.
Yeah, it's tough. All right, thanks.
The potential for vehicle to grid for load balancing is just huge. So the MPSC recently approved for DTE to spend between 423 and 460 million of our dollars, because we're the ratepayers, to install 880 megawatt hours of new lithium iron phosphatate batteries. They're going to put those at the site of an old coal plant, hook it up to the transmission system, and do price arbitrage, right? They're going to charge them when rates are low and discharge them when rates are high. For comparison, by 2030, the projected EVs in DTE's service territory will have a combined battery capacity of about 25,000 megawatt hours. You see 880 versus 25,000, right? And twice that by 2035. So if they could even tap 10% of those EVs, because they're not all going to be plugged in at the same time, they're not all going to want to have their battery drained down, but if we tap 10% of that by 2035, it'd be 5 times the capacity of DT's battery system. There's huge potential here. The Brattle Group, again, the utility consultant, projects that 60 gigawatts of VPPs could save between 15 and 35 billion, that's with a B, of utility costs. As far as I know, there are several EV charger companies that say they have vehicle to grid technology, but they haven't released it yet. It's unclear to me if this is because of issues with the car makers, concerns about warranties, right? Who's going to participate if doing so voids your warranty? Or if it's pushback from the electric utilities or some combination of both. I would love to know more about why this technology is being held captive, if anybody knows about that. Compensation. This runs to the heart of it all. Utilities run demand response programs because state law gives them generous profit adders on top of their normal profit for buying equipment for running DR programs. So their real incentive is to create programs that appear to reduce peak load a lot, but don't really work very well, which is kind of what we're seeing. VPP third-party aggregators face more scrutiny. They actually have to deliver load reduction when a critical period is declared. But how do they get paid, right? They're going to provide some incentive or actually buy batteries for their participants that they have to get paid somehow. And it's the utility that's benefiting. So how are we going to get the utility to pay money to the VPP aggregators? Well, we're not, probably. In 2020, the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission issued Order 2222, which is now an infamous number, and it allows third parties to sell capacity into the wholesale energy markets. So each of those independent system operators have markets where people bid energy and bid energy every hour and bid capacity on usually an annual basis, or now I think MISO's on a quarterly basis. And there's an auction, right? And there's a whole auction market thing that happens there. And historically, the only people that participated were utilities. Well, now third parties can participate in those programs. Well, now some places. So FERC is now kind of managing all these different independent system operators implementing this. California and New England have already done it. They've got VPPs operating. MISO has dragged their feet more than any other ISO. They asked FERC to allow for implementation in 2030, and FERC said, no, that's you're not, no. And so MISO is now working on a two-phase approach, with phase one due June 1st of 2027 and phase two in 2029 or 30. But I could not find anything on the web that would tell me what's in phase one and what's in phase two. So I'm a little unclear what this just means. If anybody knows, I would love to hear about it. Virtual power plants have been an issue at the Public Service Commission. In 2010, the MPSC prohibited virtual power plants at regulated Michigan utilities. They just said, nope, we don't want any of that. 10 years later, they thought, things are getting more mature now. We'd like some comments. Do you think we should lift the ban? 2 years later, they lifted the ban, but only for the very large customers. They talked about smaller customers, but the MPSC staff wanted to implement customer protections. They wanted to make sure that scam artists didn't come along and take advantage of people and sign them up for something they didn't understand and screw them over. So the MPSC ordered staff to convene a work group a year later, right? And the work group kicked off the next month, and it's had 3 meetings. And there have been no draft documents of any kind posted, and per an email from the person running it, there's no more Michigan specific meetings currently planned. I don't know how we get there at this pace. The only hope I can throw out here, many of you were there at our 2024 year begin meeting. One of our speakers was the chairman of the Public Service Commission, Mr. Scripps, and he talked about these DOE figures that I was just showing you. In fact, I wasn't aware of them until I heard him talk, and then I went online and looked them up, that we desperately need capacity. And he said, and I quote, "But what we're increasingly finding is that virtual power plants made up of aggregated distributed energy resources can actually play a role, and an underappreciated role, both in terms of scale and the pace that is going to be needed in order to accommodate that load growth. All of us, I think, have a responsibility to look beyond the traditional toolbox and begin to better understand what the GLREA has been advocating for a long time. How do those distributed resources, all those small 5 kilowatt systems on people's houses, how do you aggregate them to get to 160 gigawatts of potential that the DOE finds that virtual power plants can provide between now and the end of the decade? I ask you to bring your best ideas, what the right metrics connected with those ideas, what additional obstacles you're seeing that could be folded into a performance-based approach to sweeping away the barriers that inhibit our ability to get the distributed energy resources onto the system that we're going to need and be able to meet the demands of reliability and load growth between now and the end of the decade." Well, my short answer to that challenge is you have to pay. And our current outflow rates are not attracting distributed generating resources at the rate that more reasonable rate outflow rates would do. And if you want to have VPPs, there has to be a way for the aggregator to actually get paid. And waiting for MISO to do their thing is not going to happen in time to stop the crisis before 2028. So it's rather frustrating. So my conclusion is that our region is facing a power generation capacity crisis, and we can't build new plants fast enough to solve it. The replacement of so many thermal plants with wind and solar creates a load balancing problem. Utility batteries are only part of the solution, that they're way too expensive to be the whole solution. Virtual power plants, which are aggregations of flexible load and small generation batteries, can deliver significant capacity when it's needed, allowing a larger portion of generation to be intermittent, and VPPs can be created quickly. The MPSC chair is aware of the situation and feels some urgency, but the MPC staff is still moving along like a glacier to get VPP approval in Michigan. So that is my tortured State of the Union address to you. And with that, I will throw it open to questions. Father Morris.
Yeah, hi, John. I'm just curious, given the pleasant political, machinations going on, if there's a possible trade war, and then the Premier of Ontario said about withholding power, or at least or upping the case, tariffs on that to Midwest states, and Michigan would be one of the states hit. How might that affect? Would that help DTEs or utilities opposition to VPP melt away if there's, if that demand becomes more acute?
Yeah, so there's a lot of hay made about Ontario may shut off power to Michigan, but we currently import less than 1% of our total electricity from Ontario. There's a lot of Ontario power that goes into New England, and that could be a big problem in New England. I don't think it would be very much of a problem here. There has been testimony on my part and numerous others asking the Public Service Commission to create a larger interconnect to Ontario. Ontario is really cool because they have winter peaking. Their maximum demand is in the winter because they have a lot of electric heating. Our maximums in the summer, it'd be great for us to sell them power in the winter, and they would sell us power in the summer. And we do that, but in very small amounts. Would a cutoff change the utilities tune on VPPs? I don't think so, but I'm not sure.
Hey, John, why don't you stop the screen sharing?
Ah, sure. That would be a great idea. Thank you. Now I can see everybody. That's better. Okay, John Freeman.
So I find this disconnect between the staff and the chair of the commission really interesting. And I can't remember, I'm sure you reported back to the committee a month or so ago, but didn't you ultimately speak to the guy that was heading up this work group?
Yeah, it was all email exchange, and he ignored several communications. And then when I copied his boss, suddenly he responded and said, "Oh, we haven't just had the one meeting that you found posted. There's another website that shows, we had these other 3 meetings, but we don't have anything scheduled right now. You can sign up for the listserv, and we'll notify you if and when that happens again." We've been doing meetings internally and talking to some consultants and things, but there's been no. I mean, normally the way this goes is the staff writes a draft, a straw man document, and then it has a comment period where everybody comments on that, and they do some revisions, and then they take it to the commission, right? There hasn't even been a straw man document. So I think there's a lot of process between here and there.
Well, I think we should think about drafting a letter to Chairman Scripps saying, hey, you talked about this at the meeting last December, and yet your staff, emphasizing your staff, are not moving at all. So what do we need to do in order to get this process moving forward, type thing? So thank you.
Yeah. Patrick.
Okay, off mute. Excellent presentation.
Thank you.
Uh, I sure would like to run a virtual power plant at the little community that I'm developing if I could. Right now it's being cast as an off-grid community, largely because the economics aren't there right now. Well, like you said, they have to pay you fairly. Now, I have a lot of things I could say.
Patrick, what
but,
is your community for the everybody here?
Oh, I gave a presentation a couple of
Yeah.
weeks ago. It's called Sylvan's Neighborhood. It's 9 homes just west of Chelsea, Michigan, that's paired up with a farm and completely powered by renewable energy, or 99%, let's say. We might allow generators for really extreme situations. But there's got to be a way to play this that plays into the political climate that we're in right now, which is actually very divisive, but could appeal to people on both sides. You know, there's been an energy emergency that's been declared. Now, I'm sure that this isn't what they had in mind exactly, but as you said, as you said though, this virtual power plants might be the fastest way to deal with it. And if it's an emergency, you have to move fast. If we don't, what's going to happen is it's going to be blackouts, and then they're going to have this mad rush to build nuclear power plants as fast as they can. Well, and there's probably going to be an accident, and then everything's going to fall apart. I'm just projecting into the future, but we don't.
The latest news from MISO is they've asked for approval for an expedited approval program for certain generating facilities, which is going to come down to natural gas plants, right?
It could
which plays
yeah.
into Trump's drill baby drill and you know all of that. But you can't build a natural gas fired power plant in 3 years.
Yep.
So that's not going to solve this problem.
Well, this doesn't really require any capital outlay from the utility companies or the government. So I'm completely sold on it. I like the idea. I think, you know, since the MPSC chair Scripps urged GLREA to bring back the best metrics, I guess that might refer to the best way of making the compensation program work and making the whole thing work mechanically. I was really impressed by the example from Portland that you gave. Utility companies, yeah, they're reluctant to do something that's not completely in their control. But I think with, you know, modern AI programs and everything, they could achieve a very high degree of certainty based on all the data that's being collected by these pilot programs, right? If it reduces to 2.5%, that's going to be well known. It doesn't even take a very sophisticated AI program to do this, and no, they should accept it. What I think what's really great about this though is it's completely neutral as to what kind of power is being produced, and that potentially can unite people on both sides who realize that there's a problem. This isn't a giveaway program for green energy or something like they'll say, right? It's not that way. Although in reality, it turns out that way. But actually, they're not giving anything away because they're paying their fair share for it. I would like to suggest an idea about how to assess how much power should be compensated. You were saying they know your patterns of usage,
right?
I would make this thing completely neutral with regard to demand reduction and supply increase.
Well, I think we've got a great precedent there that Consumers has a program and they pay you $1 a kilowatt hour, right? So that analysis has already been done and approved by the MPSC at $1 a kilowatt hour. So the utility can't now say, oh no, that's absurd compensation because we don't own it. Well, no, you already said it was worth that to justify your program. So you can't now say it isn't, and they will try, by the way.
Even going further, we know what the average electrical consumption is per household in this country. And we can break it down to maybe household size or home size if we wanted to. We could actually have a program where any deviation from that net usage amount during those times of critical loads will be compensated at a higher price. Yeah, and that sounds very abstract, but if you're already a super saver of electricity, right? This just it also encourages you
I see
to
what
be more
you're saying.
efficient in
You're
general.
saying reward people for
Right.
just kind of ongoing energy efficiency and stuff.
Net difference from the national baseline.
Right.
And if you generate electricity from your F-150 and send it out, that even makes it better, because on a net basis, you're actually feeding in now, right?
You were saying, you know, it's not a giveaway to green energy, even though it'll work out that way. I'm not sure it'll work out that way.
Now, I shouldn't have
I
said
think there's a
giveaway.
tremendous number of commercial office buildings that have backup generators for their computers, and they could respond by taking their building off grid and running the generators. They run them once a week anyway, just to test them out and make sure they're operating properly, right?
Yes.
So I mean, and that works, and yeah, it's a little noisy and it's fossil fuels, but it's only during a few hours of the year, and it allows us to do so much more renewable penetration, because we know we have a backup plan when the sun isn't shining or the wind's not blowing.
That's right. I have one of those myself in a store that I co-own. And it's interesting. Now it's making me think that this is like a mini gas power plant, or it could be.
They
It
are.
runs on natural gas, right? It's like, okay, we just spun up a new natural gas power plant. It's rather small, but yeah. So I would just take this to the most general level possible to encourage efficiency, reduction in consumption across the board, and of course production of power. That'd be my recommendation. And
I was in
after you get into
information
other things,
technology and telecom for 35 years. And I mean, every place with a large computer system has a backup generator.
Yep.
And they're expensive to buy, and they're expensive to insure. Uh, and you have to maintain them, right? There's regular testing and maintenance and stuff. If those guys could get paid for it, they'd love that.
And the one last thing I would say that's kind of driving my motivation of this, especially since I'm developing a community, is that I've got a thing against smart meters, the way they're currently designed. I think they could be designed better, and I'd like to push for that too. I don't know if the meter has to constantly send out signals of what your usage is per hour. I think maybe you can just capture all that data, collect it for a month, and send out one signal. And that would make me personally feel a lot better about participating in a program like this. So that may not be something that everybody cares about. But the program was simplified enough, it could appeal to a wide range of those people too, who are otherwise hesitant, because there are those people out there.
I want to comment. I see in the chat a mention of the new vehicle to grid standard protocol that was just recently released. I did see a news blurb about that. So thanks to, is it Jens? I don't know how to pronounce your name. I apologize, but there's the link there in the chat. So that's very cool. Thank you. And yeah, so Michael Miller comments that, you know, Michigan acts like it's new. We do this, the MPC does this over and over again, things that have been done all around the world, all around the country, and well, we've never done it here. So it's like some amazing new technology we have to study for years before we use it. It makes me kind of nuts, but all right. Lee.
You know, we all have the right to export power into the grid. Why don't we change our GLRI meetings to Saturday afternoon at 3 o'clock, and we'll all turn off our houses except for our computer and see how big of a bump we can get in the thing, because that graph you showed from Oregon is kind of impressive. So I'm ready to have a meeting in the summer when the export rates are actually almost 12 cents, right? So we'll all make a little money during the meeting, and we'll demonstrate to the power company what happens when everybody that has solar on their house exports 100% of their output.
I think we'll need more than our 200 or 300 members to really make an impression with that, but I like the idea.
Thank you.
Go ahead, Jay.
I like the previous gentleman's comments about you know, anything critical ends up on a UPS, and usually a backup generator behind that. Places like Wolverine Tower here in Ann Arbor, you know, they're the HR and bean counters for U of M. a lot of data centers, hospitals, and so forth, police departments and such. That but their model is they let the power fail first, then they fail over to their backup systems. But the prepper in me, 3 is 2, 2 is 1, 1 is none kind of guy. But to avoid a power emergency, if more people were simply using less, and I mentioned many of the folks here know me that I run a hybrid home. Most of my stuff in the house is all low voltage. The TV, the computers, the internet router, night lights, et cetera, and they're all 12 volt DC. And I run a 1600 amp hour lithium iron phosphate bank to power that. And my Solarc 15K system with 48 volt battery bank, that's for the big ticket items. But that is off grid most of the time, with the exception of a couple of months during the winter. But if more people used less energy from the grid will go longer before they run into this power emergency problem. So we continue to do our promotion of doing off-grid systems or lightly gridded systems with battery backup. Keep promoting that, and we will help to avoid a power electrical energy emergency. Back to you guys.
So there's a comment in the chat that says some studies actually show that a VPP is actually more reliable than a single large asset, and that's absolutely true. And that was a fun thing in testimony where the Brattle Group, which DTE had hired, made a comment that their capacity rating on Monroe overestimated its real contribution because it's one giant unit, and if one transmission tower falls over, the whole thing's disconnected and you got nothing, right? And I just love that. I've used that repeatedly. Jim, you're muted.
I know. So I'm really kind of enthused about the concept of using the batteries. I know that it's distributed input in Texas by that company, that German company, but kicked it around that, we're constrained to be able to share power with our neighbors legally in this state and other states. However, not constrained to take a battery that's fully charged and plug it in somewhere else. So if you had a sort of a cooperative effort, say 32,000 members that had 32 kilowatt hours of batteries extra that they could generate, and then put people to work actually moving those batteries to a central location, which now we're still constrained by 1 megawatt. But if the infrastructure was there on the grid that it could take the 1 megawatt of battery power, that's $1 million an hour, if I did my math right. So there's end runs around this that could be really, really unique.
No, it was $1 a kilowatt hour, so a megawatt for an hour would get you $1,000. Sorry.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Well, what's in a zero?
Yeah, or 3 of them. But I like your point. So, and I want to correct one small technicality here.
There's a few.
It's not illegal to share power with your neighbor. It's illegal to sell it to them.
Oh,
So
Really?
during our power outage here, when I was running my house off my Prius, I set up a table in my garage with a bunch of device chargers and sent out to my neighbors, come on over to my house, charge up your phone, charge up your laptop, whatever. And they did. I mean, people came over, which then of course they had to stand there while their stuff charged because they didn't want to leave it. So then I had to show them how the whole system worked, and they were, it was great.
No, I to clarify that, to do that on the grid, to share power with to create a microgrid,
Yeah.
You can't do that, but you could with batteries. So, but it would still be isolated from the grid.
So there are those, portable power units, which I've got a small one, right? Jack Ree's famous for them, Blue Letty's out there. There's like 20 different companies. I mean, there's nothing to keep you from having a giant rack of those in your garage, and when the power goes out, putting a sign out that says, you know, battery power, you know, you pay me X dollars, and you're not selling electricity across a property line. You're leasing a device. I can rent a generator. I can rent a battery.
It's true. One last point about this, and this concept will come up.
It's like the Ford F-150. It's not grid interactive. It's not working in parallel with the grid because the grid is dead. So sorry, Jim, go ahead.
Well, I'm sorry. Just one last point. So these ideas are proliferating because of the Ann Arbor Sustainable Energy Utility, which is kind of slow in forming, but that is definitely a possibility where people want to take part in such a program, but don't have a solar window. So if they participate and you have wherever you're charging those batteries from, it could be on public land or your neighbor, those batteries can be charged and moved in. So you basically have a hybrid system. It just doesn't have its own solar plugged in, and it would work fine. So it could. Yeah.
So we just need to start installing generator input plugs and transfer switches in homes that have no generators.
Sure.
And you can plug in whatever source to that, right?
Right on.
Okay, well, it's after 8 o'clock, so thank you very much, John. This has been a great and stimulating discussion. Next week, we're going to have Davina Bryan, who's the state director for Farm to Power, talk about her organization and what they've been doing. And so that's on the schedule for next Thursday, Farm to Power. So thanks for coming tonight, and hope to see you next Thursday. And thanks again, John.
Very welcome.
Take care, everybody.
Yeah.
Been a great audience.
Thank you.
Thank you.